They called me the silent one, Jimin. Every day, like a mantra. Those words haunted me. Jungkook's voice trembled, breaking the warmth of the podcast studio. Jimin, sitting across from him, froze. The spotlight illuminated his pale face as Jungkook's words crept through the air, chilling and ominous. Jimin stared at Jungkook, searching for a lie, but found only painful honesty. What do you mean, Jungkook? You were bullied. Jungkook nodded slowly, his eyes drifting into the distance, as if revisiting shadows of the past. They took my voice, Jimin. They stole my dignity, piece by piece. Jungkook's voice was hoarse, filled with unhealed wounds. Jimin, who had always known Jungkook as a cheerful and energetic person, felt his world crumbling. His skin tingled, sensing the aura of sadness and anger emanating from his friend. Who were they, Jungkook? Who did this to you? Jimin asked, his voice trembling. Jungkook paused, his jaw tightening. They're shadows of the past that always follow me. They're the ones who taught me that the world isn't always fair. The Between Us podcast was supposed to be a relaxed and laughter-filled moment between two friends, Jungkook and Jimin. However, their conversation turned into a painful revelation as Jungkook suddenly opened the curtain to his dark past. Jimin, who thought he knew Jungkook inside and out, was shocked to find his friend harboring such deep wounds. Jungkook, in a trembling voice, recounted how he was the target of bullying at school. He was called the silent one because of his quiet nature, mocked for his appearance, and ostracized by his classmates. Every day was hell for him, where he had to face insults and violence. Jimin, listening attentively, felt his heart breaking into pieces. He never imagined his friend going through such suffering. Tears began to flow down his cheeks, reflecting the pain Jungkook felt. Why didn't you ever tell me, Jungkook? Jimin asked, his voice choked. Jungkook looked at Jimin with eyes full of sadness. I was scared, Jimin. I was scared you'd see me differently. I was scared you'd leave me. Jimin shook his head, his tears flowing more freely.
No, Jungkook.
I'd never leave you. You're my friend, and I'll always be here for you. Their conversation continued, revealing more details about Jungkook's dark past. Jimin, patiently and lovingly, listened to every word Jungkook spoke. He promised to help Jungkook face his past trauma and find peace. The first episode of the Between Us podcast ended with tears and a strong promise of friendship. Jimin was determined to help Jungkook heal his wounds and find happiness. However, the shadows of Jungkook's past still haunted him, and the mystery of the bullies remained unsolved. They're still watching me, Jimin? Jungkook whispered, his eyes fixed on the closed studio door. They won't let me forget what they did. The studio air hung thick, charged with unspoken words and the lingering scent of Jungkook's raw vulnerability. Jimin's hand rested on Jungkook's shoulder, a silent promise of support in the face of the chilling revelation. Watching you? What do you mean, Jungkook? His voice was a low murmur, barely audible above the hum of the recording equipment. Jungkook's eyes, usually bright and full of life, were now shadowed with a deep, unsettling fear. Little things, Jimin. A message left on my phone. A shadow I catch in the corner of my eye. It's like they're reminding me they're still here, still in control. He shuddered, pulling away slightly. They know things only they could know. Things I buried deep. A cold dread coiled in Jimin's stomach. This wasn't just a story about past bullying. It was a present-day terror, a phantom menace that refused to fade. Have you told anyone? The police? Management? Jungkook shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Who would believe me? The famous idol, paranoid and seeing ghosts. They'd think I was losing my mind, Jimin. And besides... He trailed off, his gaze dropping to his hands, clenched tightly in his lap. They warned me. They said if I ever spoke about what happened, things would get worse. The weight of Jungkook's fear pressed down on Jimin, suffocating him. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to shield his friend from whatever darkness lurked in the shadows. We'll figure this out, Jungkook. Together. We'll find out who they are and make them stop. The rest of the podcast was a blur. Jimin tried to keep the conversation light, to steer away from the heavy topic, but the tension in the room was palpable. Every word, every laugh, felt forced, a thin veneer over the dark undercurrents of Jungkook's fear. After the recording ended, they sat in silence, the studio lights casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Jimin watched Jungkook, his face pale and drawn, his eyes constantly darting to the door, to the windows. We need to find out who they are. Jungkook, Jimin repeated, his voice firm. We need to find out who's doing this. Jungkook nodded, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. There was one name they used, a nickname. They called themselves the Collector. The name hung in the air, cold and ominous. The Collector? Jimin repeated, his brow furrowed. What does that mean? I don't know, Jungkook admitted, his voice barely a whisper. But they said they collected memories, broken pieces of people's lives. And they said they had mine. A chill ran down Jimin's spine. The Collector. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, not a real-life threat. Where do we start? There's one person, Jungkook said, his voice hardening. Someone from my past, someone who might know more. His name is Minjae. The name was a sharp, unexpected twist. Jimin felt a knot of unease tighten in his chest. Minjae? Do you trust him? Jungkook's expression was unreadable. Trust is a luxury I can't afford anymore, Jimin. But he's the only lead we have. And he's the one who was there from the start. They left the studio, the city lights blurring into a neon haze. The night was cold, the air thick with the unspoken threat. Jimin felt a sense of urgency, a desperate need to unravel the mystery before it consumed Jungkook entirely. They found Minjae in a dimly lit bar, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. He was older, his face etched with lines of weariness, his eyes holding a haunted look. Jungkook, Minjae said, his voice raspy, surprise and something else, something like dread, flashing across his face. What are you doing here? We need your help, Minjae, Jungkook said, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. We need to know about the Collector. Minjae's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his features. He looked around the bar, as if expecting someone to be watching. You shouldn't have come here, he whispered, his voice trembling. You shouldn't have brought this back. Tell us what you know, Jimin pressed, his voice firm. Minjae hesitated, his gaze darting between Jungkook and Jimin. They're dangerous, he said finally, his voice barely audible. They're not just bullies. They're something else. Something darker. Darker how? Jungkook asked, his voice strained. Minjae shook his head, his eyes filled with fear. I can't tell you. They'll know. They'll know I spoke to you. Then write it down, Jimin suggested, sliding a napkin and pen across the table. Minjae's hand trembled as he scribbled on the napkin, his eyes darting around the bar. He slid the napkin across the table, his face pale. Don't look for them, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Just leave it alone. For your own safety. Jimin unfolded the napkin, his eyes widening as he read the words scrawled in Minjae's shaky handwriting. They're watching. They're always watching. The Collector is everywhere. And below that, a single, chilling word. Run. The napkin felt cold in Jimin's trembling hand, the word run, echoing in his mind like a death knell. The bar, once a dimly lit haven, now felt like a suffocating trap. Minjae's fear was palpable, a chilling testament to the danger they were facing. We can't just run, Jungkook said, his voice hard, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. We need to know what they want, why they're doing this. Jimin nodded, his gaze fixed on the napkin. But Minjae's right. They're watching. We need to be careful. They left the bar, the city lights blurring into a menacing glow. The night air was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by the distant wail of sirens. They felt exposed, vulnerable, as if unseen eyes were tracking their every move. Back at Jimin's apartment, they spread out the napkin on the coffee table, the cryptic message staring back at them. The collector is everywhere. What did it mean? Were they dealing with a single person or a network? We need to find out who this collector is, Jimin said, his voice determined. We need to dig deeper into your past. Jungkook. Everything, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. Jungkook closed his eyes, his face etched with pain. There's a box I kept hidden. It has things, memories, things they took from me. They found the box hidden beneath the floorboards of Jungkook's old childhood room, a dusty relic of a life he had tried to forget. Inside, they found a collection of seemingly random objects. A torn photograph, a crumpled letter, a broken music box, a worn-out notebook filled with scribbled poems. Each object was a piece of a puzzle, a fragment of a life shattered by cruelty. As they examined the objects, a pattern began to emerge. The torn photograph depicted a group of teenagers, their faces blurred and distorted. The crumpled letter contained hateful words, a litany of insults and threats. The broken music box played a haunting melody, a tune that sent shivers down their spines. The notebook, filled with Jungkook's poetry, spoke of isolation, fear, and a desperate longing for acceptance. They took these from me, Jungkook said, his voice trembling. They wanted to erase me, to break me. Jimin felt a surge of anger, a burning desire to protect Jungkook from the pain of his past. We'll use these against them, he said, his voice firm. We'll find out who they are, and we'll make them pay. The notebook contained a recurring symbol, a stylized eye enclosed in a triangle. It was a strange, unsettling image, one that seemed to hold a dark power. This symbol, Jimin said, tracing the image with his finger. Have you seen it before? Jungkook shook his head, his brow furrowed. No, but it feels familiar, like a bad dream. They decided to research the symbol, searching online for any information that could shed light on its meaning. The search led them down a dark rabbit hole, revealing a history of occult practices, secret societies, and ancient symbols of power. It's an ancient symbol, Jimin said, his voice hushed. It represents control, surveillance, and hidden knowledge. Jungkook's eyes widened, a look of fear creeping into his expression. Control?
Surveillance?
That's exactly what they did. They controlled me, watched me, knew things they shouldn't have known. The symbol was a chilling link, a connection to a dark and hidden world. They were no longer dealing with simple bullies. They were facing something far more sinister, something that lurked in the shadows, pulling the strings. As they delved deeper into the mystery, they discovered a series of online forums and chat rooms where people discussed similar experiences, stories of harassment, surveillance, and psychological manipulation. They were not alone. The collector was not just targeting Jungkook. They were targeting others, weaving a web of fear and control. One message in particular caught their attention. It was a warning, a desperate plea for help from an anonymous user. They know everything. They're watching. They're coming for me. The message ended abruptly, leaving them with a chilling sense of unease. They were running out of time. The collector was closing in. Suddenly, Jungkook's phone buzzed with a message. An unknown number, a single image. It was a picture of the box, opened, the contents scattered. The message below read, "You shouldn't have opened the box. You've awakened the past." The image on Jungkook's phone burned into their retinas, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. The scattered contents of the box, once hidden treasures of a painful past, were now weapons in the hands of their tormentors. "They were in my apartment," Jungkook whispered, his voice hoarse, his eyes wide with fear. "They know where I live." Jimin's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the apartment. "We need to get out of here, now." They packed quickly, grabbing only the essentials. Laptops, phones, the box of memories, and the chilling image of the symbol. They left the apartment, the city lights blurring into a menacing glow, the shadows seeming to lengthen and deepen. They found refuge in a secluded motel, far from the city's prying eyes. The isolation was both a comfort and a curse, a temporary sanctuary that offered no real protection. "We need to find out who these people are," Jimin said, his voice firm, despite the tremor in his hands. "We need to find out what they want." They turned to the internet, their only lifeline to the outside world. They scoured forums, chat rooms, and social media, searching for any information about the collector, the symbol, or the people behind the harassment. They found a pattern, a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading them to a hidden online community, a dark corner of the internet where people shared stories of manipulation, surveillance, and psychological warfare. The community was called the Obsidian Eye, and its members were obsessed with control, power, and the acquisition of knowledge. "The Obsidian Eye," Jimin said, his voice hushed. "It's them. They're the collector." Jungkook nodded, his face pale. "They're not just bullies. They're something else, something organized, something dangerous." They discovered that the Obsidian Eye was not just an online community. It was a network, a web of influence that reached into the real world. Its members were powerful, wealthy, and connected, with access to information and resources that were beyond their wildest imaginations. "They're everywhere," Jimin said, echoing Minji's warning. "They have eyes and ears everywhere." They realized they were not just fighting against a group of bullies. They were fighting against a powerful and insidious organization, one that was determined to control and manipulate them. They decided to infiltrate the Obsidian Eye, to go undercover and gather information from the inside. They created fake profiles, adopting new identities, and began to interact with the community, slowly gaining their trust. The online world of the Obsidian Eye was a dark and twisted place, filled with cryptic messages, coded language, and hidden agendas. They learned about their rituals, their beliefs, and their obsession with control. They discovered that they were not just interested in Jungkook. They were interested in his past, his memories, and the secrets he held. "They want something from me?" Jungkook said, his voice strained. "Something they think I have." They found a clue, a cryptic message hidden within a forum post. "The key lies in the melody." "The melody," Jimin said, his brow furrowed. "The broken music box." They retrieved the music box from the box of memories, its haunting melody echoing in the silence of the motel room. They listened to the tune, searching for a hidden message, a secret code. Suddenly, Jungkook's eyes widened. "I remember," he said, his voice trembling. There were words, hidden words, within the melody. He began to hum the tune, his voice weaving through the notes, revealing a hidden message, a series of coordinates. "Coordinates," Jimin said, his voice hushed. "They're leading us somewhere." They entered the coordinates into their GPS, and a location appeared on the map. An abandoned observatory, hidden deep in the mountains. "The observatory," Jungkook said, his voice filled with dread. "That's where it all started. That's where they took my voice." They knew they were walking into a trap, but they had no choice. They had to face their past, confront their tormentors, and reclaim their stolen voices. As they drove towards the observatory, the night sky was filled with a million stars, their light cold and distant. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. They were entering the heart of darkness, where the past and the present collided, and where the truth lay hidden, waiting to be revealed. The winding mountain road, barely illuminated by the headlights, snaked upwards, each turn tightening the knot of dread in Jimin's stomach. The abandoned observatory loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the star-dusted sky, a silent sentinel guarding secrets they were desperate to uncover. "They're waiting for us," Jungkook said, his voice a low tremor, his gaze fixed on the looming structure. "I can feel it." Jimin gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "We're not going to back down, Jungkook. Not now." They parked the car a short distance from the observatory, the silence of the night broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. The air was cold, biting, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The observatory was a relic of a forgotten era, its once grand structure now a decaying shell, its windows like empty eyes staring into the darkness. They approached cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the crumbling walls. They moved slowly, their senses heightened, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found a room at the heart of the observatory, a circular chamber with a domed ceiling, where the remnants of astronomical instruments lay scattered across the floor. In the center of the room, a single spotlight illuminated a figure seated in a chair. "Welcome," a voice echoed through the chamber, smooth and chillingly calm. "I've been expecting you." The figure turned, revealing a face obscured by shadows, a voice that seemed to slither into their minds. "You've come seeking answers, haven't you? Answers to the questions that have haunted you for so long." "Who are you?" Jimin demanded, his voice trembling but firm. "What do you want?" The figure chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "I am the collector, and I want what is rightfully mine." "What do you mean?" Jungkook asked, his voice strained. "Your memories, Jungkook," the collector replied, his voice laced with a dark amusement. "The pieces of your past that you so foolishly tried to reclaim. They belong to me." The collector rose from the chair, stepping into the light. His face was pale, his eyes dark and piercing, filled with a cold, calculating intelligence. He wore a dark, tailored suit, and a silver ring adorned his finger, bearing the symbol of the obsidian eye. "You see, Jungkook," the collector continued, his voice smooth and persuasive, "memories are power. They shape who we are, define our existence. And I have a particular interest in collecting them, in controlling them." "You manipulated me," Jungkook said, his voice filled with anger. "You took my voice, my memories, my life. I merely helped you understand the true nature of reality," the collector replied, his eyes gleaming. "The world is a stage and we are all actors playing our parts. I simply rewrote your script, gave you a new role to play." The collector gestured towards a screen that flickered to life, displaying images of Jungkook's past, distorted and manipulated, spliced with fabricated scenes. "These are your memories now, Jungkook. These are the truths you will remember." Jimin felt a surge of rage, a burning desire to protect Jungkook from this twisted manipulation. "You're insane," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "You can't do this." "Can't I?" the collector replied, his eyes narrowing. "I already have, and now it's time for the final act." The collector snapped his fingers, and figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by masks, their movements precise and menacing. They surrounded Jungkook and Jimin, their presence a chilling reminder of the power they wielded. "They are my collectors," the collector said, his voice laced with a dark satisfaction. "They collect what I desire. They enforce my will." "What do you want from Jungkook?" Jimin asked, trying to buy time. "He has a unique memory, a perspective I require. One that will unlock the final piece of my collection," the collector said. The collectors moved forward, their eyes fixed on Jungkook, their intentions clear. The battle for Jungkook's mind had begun. The collectors, faceless and silent, advanced, their movements a synchronized dance of menace. Jungkook, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, stood his ground, his gaze locked on the collector. Jimin, adrenaline surging, positioned himself between Jungkook and the advancing figures, his hands clenched into fists. "You're not taking him," Jimin growled, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. The collector chuckled, a low, chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "Such loyalty, admirable but futile." He gestured, and the collectors lunged, their movements swift and precise. Jimin fought back, his training kicking in, but the collectors were skilled, their movements fluid and coordinated. He managed to land a few blows, but they were relentless, their attacks relentless. Jungkook, watching Jimin struggle, felt a surge of guilt and anger. He couldn't let Jimin fight alone. He had to reclaim his voice, his memories, his life. He closed his eyes, focusing on the fragments of his past, the stolen moments, the buried emotions. He remembered the melody of the music box, the hidden words, the coordinates. He remembered the feeling of being watched, of being controlled, of being erased. He opened his eyes, his gaze hardening, his voice resonating with a newfound strength. "You won't take anything else from me." He stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice echoing through the chamber. The collectors paused, their movements faltering, their attention drawn to Jungkook's newfound resolve. "You think you can control me?" Jungkook continued, his voice rising, his memories flooding back, each one a weapon against their manipulation. "You think you can erase me? You're wrong." He began to speak, his voice weaving through the chamber, his words a torrent of truth, a reclamation of his stolen identity. He spoke of the pain, the fear, the isolation, but he also spoke of the strength, the resilience, the hope that had kept him alive. His words resonated with a power that shook the chamber, a raw emotion that defied their control. The collectors, their masks faltering, their movements becoming erratic, began to recoil. The collector, his face contorted with anger, stepped forward. "Silence him," he commanded, his voice laced with venom. But it was too late. Jungkook's words had broken their hold, shattered their illusion. The collectors, their minds unraveling, turned on the collector, their movements becoming violent, their attacks relentless. The collector, caught off guard, stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you doing?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I control you." But they no longer listened. Jungkook's words had freed them, broken their chains. They were no longer collectors. They were victims, seeking retribution. The collector, overwhelmed by their attacks, fell to his knees, his face a mask of fear and desperation. He reached for the silver ring on his finger, the symbol of the obsidian eye, but it was too late. The ring shattered, the symbol dissolving into dust, its power broken. The collectors, their movements slowing, their eyes clearing, looked at Jungkook, their expressions a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you," one of them whispered, his voice hoarse, his mask falling away to reveal a young, frightened face. They turned and left the chamber, disappearing into the shadows, their presence fading like a bad dream. Jungkook, his voice hoarse, his body trembling, looked at the collector, who lay on the floor, his eyes filled with a hollow emptiness. "It's over," Jungkook said, his voice barely a whisper. "You can't control me anymore." The collector, his gaze fixed on Jungkook, whispered, "It's not over. The obsidian eye is everywhere. They are watching. They will find you." Then his eyes closed and he became still. Jimin walked over to Jungkook and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is over, Jungkook. For now." They left the observatory, the rising sun casting long shadows across the mountains. The night had been a battle, a confrontation with the darkness that had haunted Jungkook for so long. But they had faced it together and they had emerged victorious. As they drove away, the observatory shrinking in the rearview mirror, Jungkook looked at Jimin, his eyes filled with gratitude and a newfound sense of peace. "Thank you, Jimin," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You saved me." Jimin smiled, his hand resting on Jungkook's shoulder. "We saved each other, Jungkook. We saved each other." The drive back to the city was a silent, reflective journey. The rising sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and rose, a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. Jungkook, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, seemed lost in thought, processing the events of the night. Jimin, his hand resting on the steering wheel, allowed him the space he needed, knowing the weight of the past he carried. Back in the city, the normalcy of everyday life seemed surreal, a jarring shift from the chilling encounter at the observatory. The threat of the obsidian eye still lingered, a dark cloud hanging over their heads, but for the first time, they felt a sense of control, a defiance against the shadows that had haunted them. They returned to Jimin's apartment, a temporary sanctuary, and began to sift through the remnants of their investigation. The box of memories, once a source of pain, now held the keys to understanding their tormentors. The symbol of the obsidian eye, now stripped of its power, remained a chilling reminder of the organization's reach. "We need to expose them," Jimin said, his voice firm, his gaze fixed on the laptop screen. We need to show the world what they're doing. Jungkook nodded, his eyes filled with a newfound resolve. They can't keep hiding in the shadows. We need to bring them into the light. They began to compile their findings, gathering evidence of the Obsidian Eye's activities, their manipulation, their surveillance, their psychological warfare. They created a digital dossier, a collection of testimonies, documents, and recordings that painted a disturbing picture of the organization's reach and influence. They reached out to trusted journalists, individuals known for their integrity and commitment to truth. They shared their findings, their stories, their fears. The journalists, initially skeptical, were soon drawn into the web of conspiracy. Their investigative instincts ignited. The story broke like a wildfire, spreading across the internet, igniting a storm of public outrage. The Obsidian Eye, once a hidden force, was now exposed, their secrets laid bare for the world to see. The backlash was swift and fierce. Protests erupted in major cities, demanding justice and accountability. Law enforcement agencies launched investigations, tracing the organization's activities, uncovering their network of influence. The Obsidian Eye, their power crumbling, their members exposed, went into hiding. They retreated into the shadows, their grip on control loosening, their influence waning. But they were not defeated. They were wounded but not destroyed.